Welcome back. We turn now to the search for answers in the district. There have been 105 homicides in D.C. this year alone. Gunfire continues to burst into homes, with a teenage girl wounded by a bullet just this week. Over the weekend, D.C.'s police union voted no confidence in the chief. Our reporter Richard Reeve was there as Chief Lanier faced the public at a community meeting.
All those illegal drugs that they are selling.
Anger, frustration, and concern about D.C.'s rising homicide rate made this a standing room only meeting.
Look, we've got a crime problem in this city. We've got a crisis in this city.
This gathering takes place as the city's homicide rate is at 105. Police say illegal guns, large round magazines, and synthetic drugs are driving those numbers.
It's horrible when a child can't leave school and make it to a library, a D.C.-sponsored program, and not get shot.
There's still an ongoing investigation.
This is Chief Kathleen Lanier's first public meeting since the D.C. Police Union gave her a no-confidence vote in the wake of the homicide numbers. But she says those voting against her are a minority.
I think the 70% of the officers that did not vote, I've heard from most of them in the past couple of days. In fact, a lot of the strategies we use, I go around, I get officers, detectives, and sergeants involved in that strategy.
On Wednesday, a federal, state, and local team of officers seized a record 265 pounds of synthetic drugs.
We are committed to going after these synthetics wherever they're coming from and getting at that source, and I think today's bust sends a tremendous message that we're not going to give up.
Chief Kathleen Lanier is doing it.
Despite the union vote, residents here applauded Lanier. They say this isn't a policing problem, but a community problem.
Maybe when people don't have jobs and they don't have any way to support themselves, they maybe take advantage of people that do have something.
Richard Reeve reporting there, and joining us now here, Kenyan McDuffie, a Democrat who represents Ward 5 on the District of Columbia Council. He chairs the Committee on Judiciary, which has oversight over public safety. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Hope you've been having a good summer, these issues notwithstanding. It's great to have you here today.
Always a pleasure.
To what extent do you have a sense of what's driving the increase in crime that we're seeing, and do you think D.C. police have enough of a sense of what the causes are to be able to then in turn formulate a response strategy?
Well, I don't think there's one particular cause, Bruce, and I was at the meeting last night that you just showed at the 5th District Police Headquarters, and what was clear from the residents who were there who expressed themselves is that they're not interested in finger pointing. They know that there are multiple things that contribute to crime, but that we need a more comprehensive approach to address it. Law enforcement by itself is not going to solve our crime problem here in the District of Columbia, and we need a public health approach that brings in other agencies like our health department, like our human service agencies, as well as our Department of Employment Services. And so I think residents express their frustration, but they recognize that our law enforcement officers are really working hard, and we're going to have to help them and support them by making sure that we have a multi-system approach to address crime.
A lot of people in the community and a lot of people that we've just talked about this issue with here on News Talk are saying the same thing, that the causes run deep and the solutions must run deep. Does that preclude, though, strategies in the short term that get at this problem and make sure that if we're at 105 now, that we're not at 205 when the year comes to an end?
No, it does not preclude that. And I know that working with Mayor Bowser, working with my council colleagues, many of whom I've spoken to and have been to a number of crime meetings like I have across the District of Columbia over the summer, we are interested in solutions, and we know that we need both short-term solutions as well as more long-term solutions. In the short term, we need to make sure we're engaging these communities where we're seeing the folks who are most at risk, where we're seeing the rise in homicides, to connect them to the resources of government to make sure that we're meeting their needs. We can do that in the short term. Mayor Bowser has put forth a proposal that the council is going to consider once we get back into session a little later on this month. And in the long term, which is very important, Bruce, we need to make sure that we have a plan, that the systems are in place to address the root causes of crime. There is a culture of violence that exists, unfortunately, in some communities across the District of Columbia, like they exist in other communities across the nation. And we need to make sure that we can identify the issues that are happening in these particular communities and make sure that we have individuals and organizations who are familiar with these communities, who have built the trust over the years of these communities, so we can get in those communities and disrupt the violence and ultimately change the culture that exists.
For people who've had advantages coming along and they have a sense of direction, things they want to get done, anything that jeopardizes their future is something that they're going to want to avoid to the maximum extent possible. By the same token, if you don't see a path down ahead of you that's bright, or you don't have things that others have in the community or family or what have you have helped you set in motion, then if things blow up, well, what difference does it make?
Absolutely, and that's what we're seeing. I've had the opportunity to meet with a number of individuals, both young and older, in some of the communities where we're seeing some of the highest crime right now and these homicides. And I've spoken to them directly, and they'll tell me, we need more resources, we need more jobs, we need more opportunities for education. And they're right. But making sure that they have access to information to connect them to programs that already exist. And the barriers to that information. We've got to eliminate those barriers to that information. We need to take this information directly to those communities and let them avail themselves of it.
Phone lines open as we talk with D.C. Councilman Kenyan McDuffie, a Democrat from Ward 5. He chairs the Council's Committee on the Judiciary. That's the committee that has oversight over public safety matters. 703-387-1020 is our number. If you're watching in the 11 a.m. hour, 11:36 now, we can take your calls, and we would love to do so. So dial in at 703-387-1020. To the phones we'll go as your calls come in. In terms of the people who were in the room when Mayor Bowser unveiled her crime-fighting strategy about a week ago, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of anger. She had a tough time, frankly, just delivering her remarks. What did you make of all that?
Well, you know, there's a movement across the country, and the District of Columbia is no exception to the Black Lives Matter movement that exists. Unfortunately, because of a number of, in many cases, young black males who've lost their lives to guns on the hands of the police. Are there some bad apples in the police departments across the country? Of course there are. But the lion's share of officers, particularly in the Metropolitan Police Department, are honest, and they work really hard, and they risk their lives every single day when they don a uniform to go out and protect and serve. And I respect them for that. But we've got to recognize why these folks are frustrated and why they decided to interrupt the mayor's press conference to express themselves. They've got a constitutional right to express themselves and petition their government, and I don't think we should do anything to stifle that right, but we should bring them to the table and work with them. And I know that I've already spoken to Eugene Perrier and some of the other folks involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. I've told them about my roundtable, and I've given them an open invitation to come down and testify. And I've let them know that I want to focus on solutions to the violence, because ultimately every person in the District of Columbia, every visitor, every resident to the District of Columbia should feel safe when they leave their homes and feel safe when they walk the streets. You have a roundtable coming up in about 2 weeks' time, and we'll put out the information on that later in the conversation for folks who might be interested. What thoughts do you have about the call for renewed focus on sentencing? The notion being, the concern being that it's a small number of people who are engaged in a disproportionate amount of the criminal activity, the violence against others, and we want to make sure we don't have a revolving door, even as we're sensitive to the concerns people have about the prison industrial complex and the pipeline to prison that so many are concerned about and have spoken about. Do we need a holistic review of sentencing? Well, I don't know if that's necessary, and I know that that's part of the mayor's proposal, and once we have the written legislation, we'll be able to review it and see how well it will help to impact the crime that we're seeing. I'll say this, though, and I want to be perfectly clear. If a person commits a crime, particularly a violent crime, the justice should come swift and it should be certain. But at the same time, what we know is we're not going to be able to arrest ourselves out of this problem. We're not going to be able to lock up everybody who commits a crime, because at the end of the day, Bruce, even when we can arrest somebody, successfully prosecute them, and have them sentenced to a period of incarceration, a good number of those individuals are going to do what? They're going to be released back into the communities from which they come. And we have to address those root causes, otherwise it's going to perpetuate this cycle that exists. A lot of these folks who live in communities where we're seeing some of the highest crime, particularly the homicides, they don't have a sense of hope. There's so much despair, and we've got to show them that violence is not inevitable, and that there are alternatives to how you conduct yourselves in these communities and how you respond to conflict. What are you hearing? What are your thoughts about the synthetic drugs that are out there now, so cheap, with the high that is so unpredictable? You hear talk about people who are zombies, people incredibly violent. It sounds horrific. People should stay away from this stuff, but it's here. Your thoughts? Sure, they absolutely should stay away from it. And it's been part of a campaign here in the district to raise awareness around it. We want people to make sure they understand the risks that they take when they ingest synthetic drugs into their bodies, the outcomes and the consequences could be fatal. And we've seen that happen across the District of Columbia and across the nation. I will say this, I really want to applaud the Metropolitan Police Department and the officers and investigators who were able to make the bust that you mentioned in your lead-in on the 265 pounds of synthetic drugs, which is an estimated value of more than $2 million. And that's going to help rid the streets of some of the synthetic drugs. But that's not the only thing that's causing the crime that we have here in the District of Columbia.
You mentioned the police. This has been very taxing, too, for fire rescue. The calls for service have been significant based on what I read.
Absolutely. I mean, the calls for service, particularly for individuals who are impacted by synthetic drugs, have risen. We've seen a spike in those calls as well.
Most of you will see more of our conversation with D.C. Councilman Kenyan McDuffie after a break. For those of you watching After Dark, you can, as always, pick up the conversation online on our blog. It's news8newstalk.com, news8newstalk.com. Back in a moment.